Hello everyone, it's Fabian from GFI. Welcome back to my channel. And for all those of you that are new to my channel, this is the moment to hit the subscribe button, and ideally you also click on that little bell icon below, and I promise you're not going to miss any more of my future videos. Right. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the German national team, which is something we don't do very often, so you can expect something big has happened. And I'm going to start by summarizing quickly the run of events since last week. So Friday last week, Germany hosted Japan in Wolfsburg, Germany, and they lost this game 4-1. 2 days later, Sunday afternoon, the DFB, the German Football Association, announced what most of us had already expected, saying that Hansi Flick and his assistant coaches have been relieved of their duties, and that sporting director Rudi Völler, who some may remember had been Germany coach many years back in 2002, will be, just for this one game, in charge on the bench together with Sandro Wagner in the upcoming friendly in Dortmund versus France on Tuesday evening. And guess what? To the surprise of many other people, Germany actually won that game 2-1. And now the DFB, of course, is looking for a new permanent Germany coach. So, quite a lot of movement in the space of just a few days, and there's been, of course, a lot of questions around that, and I thought we're just going to quickly go through that, and I'm sort of interested to see what you think about the situation. There's obviously one big question I think that everyone asks is, how could it have possibly come to this stage? I think it's a difficult question. I've read a lot in the so-called Fachmedien in Germany, so the newspapers and magazines that focus on football. I've watched a lot of football podcasts and magazines on YouTube, and listened to podcasts on streaming services discussing the issue, and I haven't really heard the one complete explanation. So we're going to push that question a little bit to the side and start with some of the easy questions, or easier questions. I think the first question is, was it right to part ways with Hansi Flick? I think it was right, especially when you look at Flick's track record, and you look at sort of the trend of his results. You just couldn't see the team improving. Flick had obviously rotated a lot before, but he said before the Japan game that he would now sort of put the 11 men down on the pitch that he thinks could form the core team for the Euros next year, and that core team sort of lost 4-1 against Japan, but showed the same kind of deficiencies and lack of team play and that we had seen in all those games before. So there was no sort of improvement, no sort of tendency, that there was nothing there to be seen that could have made you think, oh, this is now turning in the right direction, even if it was still something something under construction. But there were hardly any positive elements in there. I mean, the equalizer, the 1-1, you could argue was a nice piece of a nice combination, but overall, you saw players trying, but you didn't really see a team trying as a team. So I think, given that there was no sort of progress at all, there comes a point where because of the whole pressure, the players, the coach, the sort of relationship is impacted, and they're sitting in a hole, and it gets deeper and deeper and becomes harder and harder to climb out. And then I think some sort of develops by itself. It's a problem then. The sort of team atmosphere is no longer intact, and then there's lots of pressure from outside, from the media, from the Football Association, but also from the general public, and I think it becomes very, very hard without any external change to come out of it. So I think the decision was right. Was the timing right? Well, I think 9 months before the Euros, it was sort of the latest possible point in time to do that. I think it's understandable that after this miserable 22 Qatar World Cup, when lots of people already thought, Flick was finished as Germany coach, I think it was kind of understandable why the DFB gave him another chance. Of course, Oliver Bierhoff, who had been a part of this whole, as a sort of general manager of the German national team, had been part of the Klinsmann campaign 2006. He's been there since that time, and he was of course criticized for sort of over commercializing the Nationalmannschaft. It's quite funny. The more of Die Mannschaft, as we saw it, the more Die Mannschaft was marketed, the less Mannschaft did we see on the pitch actually. But a lot of people called for his head, so he had to go after this disastrous World Cup 22 in Qatar, where Germany once again dropped out after the group stages. But Flick was given another chance, kind of because people said, look, this World Cup is no real test. This was overshadowed by political things. And I kind of understand that. I think most people could sort of understand that, because we had all this discussion about, should Manuel Neuer wear a rainbow branded armband for the human rights or not? Then he did not, but then instead the whole players made this funny gesture that everyone ridiculed Germany for. So I think it was kind of understandable. This was what everybody talked about. They didn't talk about the game. They just talked about the human rights situation and how Germany's players should react to that. And don't get me wrong. I'm certainly not. I certainly don't approve everything that's going on there. But I just think if you decide to take part in the tournament, you shouldn't put it on the burden of the players' shoulders, what the politicians don't dare to sort out, really. So while the players were thinking about what kind of gestures they do on the pitch to satisfy that demand by the German public, a few kilometers away, a German economy minister signed another gas deal with Qatar. So I didn't think that was sort of fair on the German national team, and I think afterwards the DFB admitted that they had let this whole issue become too big, and it was too much of a distraction. And I think for those reasons alone, they felt it was right to give Flick another chance, which they did. But I still think they waited for too long. I think just a few games after that disastrous World Cup, it should have been fairly evident that this wasn't heading in the right direction. And nevertheless, they waited this long, and now I think it had reached a point where, there were, when Germany played at home, there were some 10, 15, 20,000 seats empty. People, who would have always cancelled anything just to be at home and be able to watch the game on television, just didn't care and went on with their other appointments. People didn't watch it anymore on television. The viewing numbers went down. The attendance levels in stadiums went down. People really started to lose interest in the German national team, and then it's less than 9 months now to the Euros, which of course you want the team to be prepared for well. So I think this has reached a stage where just simply the DFB was in a position where they couldn't do anything else, and of course leaving it this late has kind of damaged everyone's reputation as well. Just a few numbers here. So Hansi Flick's been in charge for 25 games since assuming the role in 21. He's won 12, drawn 7 and lost 6 games, making an average of 1.72 points. Doesn't maybe sound too bad at first glance. Nevertheless, that makes him the second worst Germany coach statistically, behind Erich Ribbeck, who was in charge for a similar number of games from 98 till 2000 with 1.5 points per game. And of course, this period, 98 2000s, probably regarded as one of the sort of darkest hours in terms of the quality of the German national team. Now, when I spoke to some friends on the Friday afternoon, just before the game versus Japan, what kind of strikes me is that none of us really expected anything good to come out of that game. And if you think about that, that's already very telling. That tells you a lot of things you must know when we talk about this situation, because of course, no disrespect to Japan, but they're not a football superpower, and you play them at home in front of your own home crowd. So to not expect anything out of such a game is very telling when you think about it, that Germany were world champions in 2014, still made it to the semis in the Euros 2016, and I would argue that between 06 and 16, if you look at their performances at the big tournaments, they've certainly been, I think that was their golden decade, and this was one of their, they were certainly among the top teams over that decade. And now we're at a situation where we have a friendly against Japan at home, and we don't actually really expect anything good to come out of it. That tells you a lot about the situation with the German national team. So the really big question is, how could have all had come to that stage? And I'll be honest, I did a lot of research. I read all the articles in the big magazines in Germany that cover football, read a lot of views, and I didn't get the one conclusive answer that has it all. But I just felt we should just look in a couple of reasons and summarize what we think we can find and what makes sense. I think the starting point has to be the circumstances of Hansi Flick's arrival, because what strikes me is that when Hansi Flick assumed the post in 21, following Joachim Löw, really everyone thought he was the perfect candidate. And there's of course good reasons to think he's the perfect candidate, because he's had success on both levels. He's obviously has a long track record in the German national team, so he certainly knows the German national team. He knows how it works with the DFB, the surroundings. He knows all of that because he has been part of that coaching team from 06 till 2014. So he was part of that coaching team he was assistant coach together with Joachim Löw under Jürgen Klinsmann during the 06 World Cup in Germany. And after that, when Klinsmann left the job, he was assistant coach to Joachim Löw until 2014, when Germany famously won the World Cup. So 8 years of experience in the German national team. So he really should have known all that there is to know working in the national team. But then he went on to club football. He first worked as co-trainer for Bayern Munich, and then assumed the position as the new head coach. And from 19 till 21, he won pretty much everything with Bayern Munich that there is in club football to win, including the Champions League, the domestic treble of Super Cup, DFB Pokal, which is German Cup, and of course the Championship. So there's actually people from that time like Hermann Gerland, who's at the time was in charge of the academy, and he had worked under all the famous Bayern coaches, Louis van Gaal, Jupp Heynckes, Pep Guardiola. He's seen them all there, and he's repeatedly said in public that working under Hansi Flick was sort of the best experience. The standard he experienced there was the highest ever to be seen. And there are some other people who spoke very highly about Hansi Flick, and around his release, as Germany coach, of course, around the match day in the Bundesliga, they asked a lot of the managers about him being released, and you couldn't hear a single bad interview. Everyone had something good to say, and not just, you could sense that not just because they didn't want to say anything negative, then you can still say nothing, but most of them really took the time to explain what a great coach he was. And I still think that probably, despite him being released, probably the majority of the general public in Germany would still regard him as a very, very good coach. So of course that kind of prompts the question, how could this ideal candidate have possibly failed in this role? It is just completely incomprehensible, really. I don't think a candidate for the job has ever been so suitable on paper as Hansi Flick was for the national team. It was the preferred solution of Joachim Löw when he left. He was a preferred solution for the DFB. Bayern was very reluctant to let him go. The general public wanted Hansi Flick. He wanted the role there. And then in the end, in 21, when Bayern and the DFB finally came to an agreement, everyone was so relieved and thought that this was all we needed, because the players we have are fantastic. We have a coach who's achieved the highest in club, who knows the national team, who's been there when Germany had the greatest success as a national team. This can't possibly go wrong, but as we know now, it could. So the question is, how could it? I think the first thing we need to understand is that there's probably a misperception that a lot of people have when they think in their head about the national team, because everyone, of course, remembers very well this 2014 success World Cup. And I think if you ask people now, that people say, we had this World Cup under Löw, then Löw stayed a little bit longer, and then at some point came Hansi Flick. Now, that's obviously not right. I think a lot of people, I'm going to tell you now, for how much longer Joachim Löw stayed, people will be surprised that he was there for such a long time. So Flick left in 2014 after the World Cup, and Joachim Löw decided to stay on, which of course, if he decides that, it was clear that the DFB would not, fire his World champion coach. That was kind of obvious, even though a lot of people, I remember, said, well, Joachim Löw, the best thing he could possibly do is leave now, because you're not going to go any higher than that. It's a traditional saying, and quite often it appears to be true. So the 2016 Euros was, of course, the next big tournament. And at that tournament, Germany still did quite okay. They were at that tournament, they were made it to the semis, where they lost against France, which I think is, still okay result. On the other hand, if you're the reigning world champion, of course, there is a certain element of expectation, also because there was still a majority of this World Cup winning team was still there, but I think it's okay. Semis is still sort of an acceptable result. But then things turned sour in the 2018 World Cup in Russia. World Cup in Russia also seems quite unbelievable now, but that's how quick things change. The 2018 World Cup in Russia, Germany actually dropped out after the group stages for the very first time in history. So at least at that stage, I think everyone should have been down to earth and accepted that this Germany team is no longer where everyone believes they are. Yes, they might have great players, but as a team, they're no longer here, but they're there. So there was a big gulf of expectation and reality. Now, a lot of people expect Löw to then go and leave, but he wanted to stay on. And the 2020 European Championships was then, of course, postponed by 1 year to 21 for obvious reasons. And it was clear beforehand that Löw would depart after that tournament. And Germany made it a little bit further than before, so it looked like they would crash out after the group stages again. And then they managed to sort of, they were down 2 times, but they managed to draw against, I think against Hungary. So they draw Hungary 2-2, and thereby they made it one step further and then crashed out against England, I believe. So it certainly wasn't a fairy tale send-off for Joachim Löw. Germany again disappointed, bottom line, completely disappointed. It wasn't as terrible on the paper as it was the World Cup before, but certainly not the sending off that Joachim Löw would have expected. And then, as we've just discussed, after that, Hansi Flick assumed the position as head coach. Now, why are we going through this? Because what I'm trying to show you is that Hansi Flick didn't come in at a stage where this Germany team was in good shape, in good order. It was very much different to the situation as when Hansi Flick assumed the position as head coach at Bayern Munich. Now, at that position, he basically took over a ship that was more or less in tight order, and he had been assistant coach before. In 2019. Here he took over a team that was already pretty much down there, even despite the fact that the public sort of was still in this sort of World Cup expectation mode. Flick took over a team that was in quite in disarray, in quite a bad shape. I think this is one of the sort of misperceptions people have about this long time. So I think one reason of Flick's failure might actually be in the fact that he already took over a team that was nowhere near where most of the people probably thought it was. Maybe that wasn't clear to himself quite in the way that it should have been. And of course, I think it must be asked or discussed whether it was right to let Joachim Löw continue for as long as he has, and not at some point earlier said, look, enough is enough, and not coming to a conclusion with Joachim Löw to depart earlier. Because I think a lot of a potential starting point for Flick has been destroyed by the fact that Löw had been there for far too long. I think it's understandable that after 2014, Löw wants to stay. Of course, you can't release your championship-winning coach. That's clear. 2016, okay, fair enough either. But after 2018, at least, I think there would have been enough time to sort of come to a conclusion that now, 4 years after your World Cup and the performance and the form going down and down and down and further down, I think there should have been a basis to sort of come to discussion and say, look, we can't go further like this. It's time for a change. And I think one has to look at that with hindsight now. One has to look at that with a critical mind and think whether it was right and correct decision, especially not looking at Löw, not looking at it from his point of view, but looking from a German national team point of view, what's best for the team, what's best for this side. Was it right to let Löw basically continue for another 7 years? Because that's as long as he's continued in this role. Whether it was right to let him go from 14 to 21 when the development or the performance of the team after the World Cup really just went into one direction, if we're being totally honest. I think that must be questioned, because I think that one result was that when Hansi Flick came in, a lot was in tatters. There was no good team atmosphere, there was no core team at all, there was no good spirit. It was, of course, some famous names, but a lot of the foundations that a coach ideally has when he starts his work wasn't there at all. And I think that sort of is probably the foundations of Hansi Flick's failure as Germany coach. The second thing, of course, is, and this is what a lot of the magazines have written about, is that he rotated a lot. He selected from a wide array of angles and players, and he experimented a lot, and he tried out a lot. And I think, while that's generally speaking not wrong, it probably was wrong looking at what he had when he started in his position, because as I said, the basics weren't there, and rotating and experimenting is something you can do when you have a foundation that's working, but quite clearly he didn't have that when he started. So it's kind of a miracle to me why he started that way. Because when you do that, of course, what happens is you have a total lack of confidence. The team is absolutely insecure, and that's not the time to start experimenting. And of course, looking back at the team selections he made and the players he selected, there was of course also criticism in the league. Some league managers, like the one from Union Berlin, publicly criticized Flick for his choice, saying, look, you're not choosing the best players, because if you did, why is this guy and this guy and this guy not playing? You have to critically ask, you have to say, look, for the first time he now selected Pascal Gross, now from Brighton, Hove and Albion, now from the Premier, who's a regular Premier League starter, and it took him basically more than a year to select him for the Germany team. I mean, it is impossible not to see him and his performances. So he's good enough to start in one of the top Premier League teams, but he wasn't good enough for the German side for more than a year. That's inexplicable to me. So you clearly have to say, I think he certainly made some mistakes in his terms of team selection, but I think those mistakes really became so bad and catastrophic because he probably wasn't so clear about the fact that about what he inherited when he started his job. Because all this team would have been a solid foundation, just returning back to basics, just coming back to what a Germany team has always shown on the pitch, the main characteristics. It's quite interesting because one magazine I've read put it quite nicely, saying, look, the kind of players a Germany manager has available now in terms of their footballing quality is much better in terms of the technical level and their abilities than also in comparison to other nationalities than the Germany side that Rudi Völler fielded in 2002 when Germany quite sensationally became runners-up to World Cup winner Brazil. Now, that Germany side, without any disrespect in terms of their technical ability, wasn't anywhere near the top or the other top European teams. But what they had was, of course, character, unity, team spirit, and so on and so on. Now, the players available now, yes, there is a big discussion. Some people say, well, they aren't as good as people think they are. I would disagree with that. I think that players available to play for Germany, selecting the best still gives you a very, very good side, a side that should at least be much better than what we've seen under Hansi Flick's tenure. But they obviously didn't play as a team. They just played individually. And you can't even say, and if you look at the games being played under Flick, individually effort has been there. It's not that the players didn't do anything on the pitch. I mean, they did try, but they didn't try coordinated as a team. So so there's a big discussion now, also in German media. Some say, look, you just have to be real. Your expectation is here, and we're just not as good. I would actually go the opposite way with what some others say. The players are that good. We have players on that level, but the team is not as good, and the players aren't lacking the skills, technical skills, athletic skills. Of course, the top team players are of course fit. Gündoğan, of course he's fit. I mean, he was one of the decisive figures in Manchester City's dominance last season. He's now playing for Barcelona. Of course he's fit, and the same can be said about the other players who are in the Bundesliga or in the Premier League. Of course they are fit, and of course they are technically on a very high level. But what this Germany side hasn't shown is what it usually was always a core competence that was never really questioned. Those Germany sides in the early 2000s, they were technically nowhere near, but self-understandingly they always had this sort of this sort of togetherness and unity, which you couldn't see under Flick. And it was quite fitting that under Völler in this friendly against France, now of course Völler didn't have the chance to train much, and of course within 1 or 2 days you cannot coach and train what has become completely lost. But still, in this 2-1 win against France, Kylian Mbappé didn't play, so you could always ask, it was a friendly, how serious did France play? Okay, fair enough. Most other big names played, but you could already see a lot of elements back on the pitch that we haven't been able to see for, a long time under Flick, really. So it was a bit like a liberation, and it was of course encouraging to see that these things still seem to be there, but they had to be brought out again. And whatever reasons there are that they couldn't show it under Flick, of course points into the direction that Flick put the emphasis on something completely else. He probably, he's obviously like Löw as well, very focused on details, on finesse, on raffinesse, and so the question is, did he maybe overcoach things to focus on the details, whereas what he should have focused on is getting the big picture right? So the game against France wasn't perfect, and there's obviously still a lot to do, but you could see that those classic things you want to see in a Germany team are still there, and that's of course very encouraging, and that's what the new coach will have to work on. And of course the question is, who are the candidates to be the new coach? This is obviously not a comprehensive list. I just looked at the names that were traded on the internet, and I have had some ideas myself. So of course one big candidate is Julian Nagelsmann, who has been sacked by Bayern Munich towards the season finale of last season. He's still on contract with Bayern, and that could be a problem because I think he's got a contract till 26, and he's still to receive some 20 million euros in salary till 26. So I have no idea how Hansi Flick, who has already been one of the, if not even the highest paid national coach worldwide, I have no idea how they would settle that, because I'm sure Bayern will not let him go for free. Well, Bayern will let him go for free, but but I'm not sure how the DFB can pay something equivalent. And of course, is Nagelsmann willing to sacrifice substantial amounts of his salary to take over this very difficult job without a guaranteed success? I don't know. Does he have the experience? I don't know. I mean, he's certainly one of the great coaches currently available. But if you look at what people have criticized him for at Bayern, and one of the reasons they let him go ultimately, is of course that he sort of failed to create a signature or the big playing style idea for Bayern Munich. Something that stretches far wider than the next 2-3 games. That he failed to create there. And I tend to agree with those people. I mean, of course, I think the vast majority of the football public still thinks that the timing and the style of his dismissal was wrong, and I absolutely agree. But when it comes to the reasons they decided to replace Nagelsmann, again, timing and style aside, I think there is some of that actually I think is true. He didn't create the typical kind of that's Bayern under Nagelsmann. He failed to create that, in my opinion. So the big signature, the silhouette, the playing style, something that other coaches, great coaches at big clubs do. No matter if you look at Simeone at Atletico, Klopp at Liverpool, Guardiola at his teams, even Flick at Bayern. I didn't see something like that for Nagelsmann's Bayern side. But if you agree that he couldn't do that, question is, can he do that for the German national team? I don't know. Does he have the necessary skill set? I think so, absolutely. He's certainly a great coach, and if you look at what he's done already with being 36 years old, I think that's quite incredible. But then, of course, he's still very young, and it's not the typical thing. Usually, people collect vast amounts of experience in club coaching, and then at a later stage take over national teams. But who knows? So he's one candidate for sure. Others think they need sort of the opposite solution. Someone like Van Gaal, who speaks German, which is, I think, a prerequisite for the job, and who's said that he would be available if something interesting in terms of a national team to coach comes up. Who's who brings in discipline and order, who could exactly, we just talked about the solid foundation. I think he'd be the right guy, at least for a transitional period up to the Euros, to provide that solid back to basics, go back to a certain foundation, and he would obviously make sure that the discipline, which according to reports was lacking some standards recently, would come back to. So Van Gaal, I think, would definitely be an option. Some of the former Bayern players like Schweinsteiger and Lahm, I think, have been advocates of such a solution, whereas Leroy Sané, when he was asked, I think, said he would love to see Nagelsmann back in this new role. Of course, other names have been mentioned, like Jurgen Klopp, who quite quickly through his agent said not available, which shouldn't surprise anyone, because Klopp, let's be honest, last season he had a difficult season at Liverpool, so in case he had thrown in the white towel at that stage, I think I would sort of have understood, but he seems eager to correct that. He had a great start to this season, so there's no chance. I think I just can't see him getting out of that role now and becoming Germany coach. And he's still got some time, so I think in the long run, Klopp is still someone who could very well become that German national coach, but maybe not right now. Stefan Kuntz is reportedly being in the process of being sacked as Turkey national coach. He's obviously had both success and at league clubs like Kaiserslautern, but also at the German U21 under 21 team. He's certainly the guy who can sort of create this positive vibe, this atmosphere that this team needs, I think, the liberation effect that also Nagelsmann could bring. I think Stefan Kuntz could do that as well. He's worked for both the DFB, but also so he'd be a candidate. Then there have been mentioned some also Völler. Of course, a lot of people think Rudi Völler should do it again for longer, especially after the victory against France. But he's repeatedly said he's not up to do that. So I think, don't know if they really don't find anyone and ask him again and again. Maybe he says yes at some point. I don't know. Matthias Sammer, not sure. So some people suggested he could do it, but it's a long time ago since he coached for the last time. Not sure if he's actually up for that or not. And of course, some people have also dropped the name like Lothar Matthäus, but I don't think, his coaching experience very limited and not for teams anywhere near the sort of caliber as the Germany side. I don't think that's a serious option. So maybe it's going to be a candidate from that we haven't mentioned, but those are sort of the names I've seen mentioned most of the times. I think Van Gaal or Nagelsmann probably the biggest favorites, and then it's a decision between going for a sort of the liberation effect, something, a breath of fresh air, which someone like Nagelsmann would bring, a young guy, relaxing things, changing the mood, bringing in a new fresh atmosphere and freeing up the heads of the players. So that would be the Nagelsmann appointment, or you take something proven, someone like Van Gaal, who is more about coming back to a solid foundation, traditional, build the building from bottom up, and reinstating order and discipline. So that's kind of the question: what kind of direction does the DFB want to go, and of course also what can they afford in terms of finance? We will see. So as soon as there is a solution on the Germany coach front, I'll make another video and I'll let you know. Please let me know your comments and ideas on the situation at the DFB and this German national team in the comments below. Let me know what you think. Do you agree? Do you have some other ideas, things that I haven't mentioned? Let me know. I look forward to read all your comments, and other than that, see you soon. Bye.